This is Duke University.
I'm really pleased with the panel that we brought together. I think you'll find that these are some of the most interesting companies and most, I think, experienced people in this space. So it's a real privilege to bring them together. We have a sort of different relationship with each one of these companies. I think, Pete, you're actually a Duke grad, is that right? Yeah. So that's great. I think when we find people who are well placed in the topics that we're interested in, who have that connection back to the home school, and you've been here a number of times before for other panels along the way as well. So
it's a lot nicer now than it used to be.
Good. Rob with Progress Energy. Progress, our hometown utility, and now part of the biggest utility in the country. So I think that's really exciting to have you be here and to open up the discussion with our students to really understand where you're headed. We have a local, real organic interest in that, but I think also seeing where a company like yours goes in this space is really critical. Gary Ratcliffe from ABB. ABB is a member of EDGE's board and has been really involved in Duke and at Fuqua for a long time in terms of their executive education programs. A real strong ally for what we're doing here, and Gary was instrumental in helping me think through how we wanted to approach this program today. So appreciate that. And then Alan Scherr from IBM. And IBM is going to be here, is it next week for a Smarter City seminar?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and Tom, what day is that?
Wednesday the 30th.
Okay, so I know the relationship between Duke and IBM is growing and is a great opportunity too. I believe is open to students, and if you haven't heard about it and want to know more, we'll make sure that the word gets out about that. So I'm really pleased, not just because these are great panelists, but because each one has a relationship, I think, to us and to the mission of what we're up to here that we really want to build on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dahlia. Many of you know Dahlia from the Power Markets course that she teaches. I hear fantastic things about that, and she's a true expert in this space. So it was an obvious sort of choice to ask Dahlia to help guide and moderate the discussion with the panel. So I'll turn it over to Dahlia. Thank you all for being here, and let's dig in. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be back. Although I'm not back full time yet, so it's very nice to have such a distinguished panel. I hope I can ask some questions that are a bit challenging, at least. But I would like to start with asking you. Well, we know that we've been talking about the smart grid for a long time. It's become part of official U.S. policy since 2007, with this Energy Independence and Security Act, and yet smart grid means a lot of things. Very different things for very different people. There is no consensus about what should be the most important objectives we are pursuing and how fast are we moving there. So I would like to start by asking you, among these three kinds of objectives we have, which is reliability, having power quality for the future needs, resiliency, or what we would say security, which is the other two big objectives, and it used to be more important than what it is now, having a resilient grid against physical and cyber attacks. And then energy efficiency and sustainability. Which of these three is really being, or which of these three would you pick if you had to pick one? And how fast are we moving towards implementing a grid that really meets that objective? And when I talk efficiency and sustainability, I'm of course including all the climate change purposes of the smart grid.
Well, let me take a shot at that. I don't bucket it that way, because I think you can get many of those pieces in the same, with the same deployment. We look at it as how can we enhance the grid, and how can we enhance the customer experience and provide benefits to the customer, whether it's reliability, or an environmental benefit that they want, or choices that they want to make. And at the same time, then, how can we build the underlying infrastructure, the analytical engine, to actually make it so that we can do this in real time? So I think you can get security, resiliency, reliability of the system, and an impact on the environment that customers want with the same investment. I don't think you have to bucket it that way.
I understand that, but I often start my class on the smart grid with asking my students, what do you think is most important? And of course, because I have tons of Nicolas students, they start with let's describe what is the future energy system that we want, and we start with low carbon electricity. So we want to integrate all possible distributed sources and storage.
Right.
We want to essentially be able to cope with all these variability and intermittency issues. And that could all be out if we just focus on, for example, the smart meters approach to smart grid. So my question is, how fast are we moving towards, for example, this kind of objective?
Well, progress, we're moving from the grid to the meter. And it's really because the grid is more mature. We can get lots of benefits for investing in the grid, investing in sensors, investing in digital devices, investing in the reliability of the grid. And we're waiting for the customers to help us decide how much do they want to pay for a smarter meter, how much do they want, how much more service do they want from us. We're working with Pete's company to do that, do some testing of our polling of our customers, if you will. And so we're starting with the grid, better business case, and we're moving towards the meter. I don't know if that answered your question either.
Okay, so you're starting to deploy some technologies and are waiting for the customers to give you the signal of how much would they pay for this. You disagree?
No, I disagree a little bit. I mean, we're a vendor, so we're selling into customers like Rob. I see that there's really four main categories that are really driving smart grid in the short term. There's the AMI piece, and if I make any one point today, AMI does not equal smart grid. AMI is a component of smart grid. It is an enabling technology. It enables you to do demand response. It enables you to do net metering if you have distributed generation. It enables you to provide incentives to reduce peak demand. It enables you to put special rates in place for electric vehicle charging. But it strictly is a means of better measurement. And we've had the smart meters in place for a couple of decades now for commercial and industrial customers. So the rollout of AMI is nothing more than a rollout of technology that we have in place for commercial and industrial customers to residential customers. Then to reinforce what Rob said on the grid, we see smart grid management, distribution grid management. It drives efficiency because you can reduce losses. Sensor technology, control of capacitor banks, you can reduce the losses on the system. There's real savings, real dollars that can be achieved that way. You can also improve reliability by being able to isolate faults and then reconnect customers. The whole concept of self-healing and automating that process and reducing the time of an outage for many customers to something that might be an hour to 90 minutes, that can be done in less than 5. With the application of communications and the ability to reconfigure the system. You're still going to have some customers out of service because there's going to be an isolated faulted section of the system until the repairs can be made, but it drastically reduces the number of people who are impacted. So the automation of the grid is, I think, the next big phase of smart grid. And if you look at the market forecast, you'll see that investment in distribution automation and distribution grid management is soon going to exceed the investments that are being made in AMI and the meters. And that's in part because utilities can drive the benefits. There's maturity in the grid. They can get regulator buy-in on those investments, and the results can be measured and tracked, and I think they're directly achievable. A lot of the benefits that come from smart meters are dependent upon changing consumer behavior. And that is not as structured as going in and applying automation to a distribution feeder that's going to drive and improve reliability. The other areas that are now emerging is the whole area of asset health and asset management, applying sensor technology. Peter mentioned being able to predict when a transformer is going to fail. We wish we were that good, but certainly you can capture information on key measurements of a transformer, such as dissolved gas, temperature, pressure, and other parameters to get a snapshot of the health of that asset, and then provide more predictive performance. You certainly want to avoid failures, which are very disruptive, but also drive condition-based maintenance and optimize that process, and then also the life cycle management of those assets. The other area, some of the transmission. Alan mentioned that China is making significant investments in transmission. That's in part to interconnect renewables. They have a lot of wind generation they want to put into the north, and they need to bring that power. So HVDC, high voltage DC lines, they're using that to bring in hydropower from the west. We see in Texas, static VAR compensators, which is a transmission technology to provide grid stability being implemented to support some of to help manage the variability of all the wind generation that they're adding to the system. So we see, and also the monitoring and control using synchrophasers and wide area measurements. And then those areas that I mentioned, those 4 areas, I think, give a foundation to then look at what a lot of people think is where smart grid is going. That's the distributed energy resources, the electric vehicles, the distributed generation, the distributed energy storage, and then demand response. Being able to manage, better manage how consumers consume energy so you can reduce that peak load, use more efficient generation, have lower CapEx in your T&D system, and it drives benefits all the way through. And I think a key point that was touched on is that utility investment is very much contingent upon regulatory approval. The challenge is, if you look at a smart meter, the utility, in most cases, can make a very solid business case that if I make that investment, I, as a utility, will save money on my meter reading, my connects and disconnects, and there's an offset for that expense, even not taking into account changing the customer behavior. But you get into distribution automation, where a key benefit is reducing a customer's outage time. Great societal benefit, great consumer benefit, but the utility doesn't put a dime in its pocket as a result of that. They do have some efficiencies, because if you can dispatch a truck to the fault, do all the switching ahead of time to isolate the fault so that you can go straight to the fault, fix it, then do all the switching to reconnect everybody automatically, then verify with, through the metering system that the fault's been fixed, you can get efficiencies in your crews, and that's a real savings, but there's a lot of benefit that accrues to the customers that doesn't necessarily help the utility. So it's that societal benefit that is where there needs to be, I think, work done with the regulators, and they vary across all 50 states. Duke, the company that you're now joining, put in basically a very similar rate case, and this is public information, one in Ohio and one in Indiana. And Ohio said yes, and Indiana said no. Very, very similar rate filings. And so there's a huge challenge as to how do you quantify and measure societal benefits that don't accrue directly to the utility, meaning utility's not taking the risk for delivering that benefit, and getting that factored into a rate case, the business case, so that an investment by the utility can move forward. And that gets into the whole issue of decoupling and different business models associated with the regulation. With that, I've taken too much time.
No, so it's great. So
Did that answer your question?
Yes. So you say advanced metering is happening because there might be a very clear business case for it. You will recover the investment by receiving these great benefits. Then automation of the grid will happen because there are some savings for the grid, and if there is interest in improving reliability, then it will happen. Then this third component, which is perhaps the component that is most appealing for many of us, which is integrating distributed energy resources and enabling these renewables and helping to go towards the goal of decarbonization of the system, is not that clear. And it's not that clear. Well, first is the third step, and second, and the other reason it's not that clear is because there might not be clear incentive for it if we don't have. So my question would be, we know there is a chance that we will move to this smart integrator model in which utilities care about energy efficiency, but there is a long way towards that, and the question would be, how do we get to really get these benefits of integrating distributed energy resources, particularly in an environment where utilities make their money by selling electricity, and integrating distributed energy resources just means making less money. So it's a little bit of the decoupling problem.
Yeah, let me comment on that. I think the end state's pretty clear. It's not hard to discuss what the grid needs to be able to do when we have high saturation of self-generation, plugged-in vehicles, controllable loads, connected storage. Because that orchestration of all those variables by utility-owned assets and non-utility-owned assets will be chaotic and unsafe and unreliable without a management layer. It's not a debate, I don't think, by anybody in the industry, notwithstanding the business model implications of selling less, of what the end state has to look like to have sustainable businesses. It's all about how you get there. So I'll just give some examples. I was in Germany recently. Many of you may know that Germany is the #1 solar producing country. And it's not because there's sun there, it's because there's incredible incentives for feed-in tariffs, and as much saturation of solar that they have, they just exceeded 10 gigawatts of connected solar just last weekend, they announced it, so it's pretty substantial. They do not have a smart grid to manage solar penetration on their network. They don't have smart metering. They have some feed-in tariff metering, but they don't have the kind of management infrastructure that I think all of us would say, well, you have to have that if you're going to have distributed energy. And why is that? Because grids are often run by engineers. Engineers like things that they can touch and buttons they can push, and they don't like price incentives and the economic theory of elasticity to somehow manage a network where measuring minutes of outages is what they get compensated on. So they like to replace transformers when they have voltage problems or reconductor a line, and that's what they're doing in Germany. That's what they're doing in California and places that they know about voltage problems. In some cases, they don't seem to want to or need to look for it until a customer complains. So what's going to cause them to invest in advance? The problem has to be substantial, and there has to be a low enough cost way in the near term for them to see an advantage in making a different investment than what they do and have been doing. You know, ABB sells a lot of transformers for overload conditions. And I would argue that the EV strategy of most utilities implied today is to buy more transformers. And they're going to wait for a few of them to pop, and they're hoping to find them before they pop. But in the end, they're going to say, we're just going to put more transformers in. And that's okay for up to a point, and then it gets too expensive, and there'll be a better way. So it's all about when, not what. And I think the careful art of avoiding the risk penalty that regulators will throw on a utility that's a little too cutting edge. If they do what turns out to be viewed 2 years, 3 years away, because their memory of the regulator is pretty short, the right decision today, 2 or 3 years from now, could look like the wrong decision, and there's a risk of disallowance, and no utility wants to do that. So the upside for them is low, the downside is high if they're wrong, and so most of them are waiting. So what they're investing in are things that are pretty good bets today. Cost takeout in the grid, great bet today, if it's there. In California, where they had massive shortages on the power side, then demand response, that drove the legislature to do AMI. So why not in Oregon? Well, because they have lots of power. They were an exporter. California's an importer. Why in Texas? Well, because the wholesale market was falling apart, and the political solution was AMI. They have not instituted time-based prices in Texas, even though for now 4 years they've been solving a problem that happened because they had poor load factors. So that's the reality of the investment climate. It's really not a technology problem. And I don't think the end state is all that confusing. We know technology will change, but the end state will be a very highly orchestrated system of managing distributed resources with all kinds of price signals, controllable options, multiple communication paths, various business models, all that creativity. But right now, I think most utilities are waiting to take steps that they're ordered to take, or where they've really got a demonstrable problem to solve that they know they can monetize.
But we are making investments. Let me just take that point. So the old Progress Energy has got about $10 billion worth of assets. And our board has approved $950 million worth of smart grid investments over the next 6 years. So when you think about it, we recognize that it's coming, and we don't know exactly when, but we know we need to be ready. One of our obligations as utility is to be ready when distributed generation comes. You can put it on today, I've got to be ready to take it. You know, we've got about 10 megawatts of solar on our system today, which we're ready to handle. So we have about a 15,000 megawatt system. If we had 5,000 megawatts worth of solar, we're not ready to handle it. Right? 10 we can do. So we're trying to build that system today to make sure when a generator puts power on our system, we're ready to take it and maintain the reliability. So it's coming. Our demand response, or our smart grid investments have been approved by our jurisdictions on a demand side management basis, energy efficiency. That was the business case that we built. That we can take and create a virtual power plant on the grid with our investment in upgrading our grid. So we're going to replace 2 peakers by doing the distribution automation that we're doing. So our business case is what Peter mentioned. I can replace two peakers with the smart grid investment. Very powerful, environmentally sound, business-wise sound. Really, the customers don't see it, which is, you know, we like it better.
Two peakers doesn't cost $950 million.
Right. That portion of our investment was $250 million. $250 million was the offset for those peakers. The rest of ours is 1,000 megawatts of demand response. So again, which is 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 peakers worth of generation saved. So we've got a system, Peter talked about it, I was kidding with him, it's 30 years old, we're buying parts on eBay today. So the smart grid is a great opportunity for us to invest in technology that we know we have to replace and get more value for it and expand it. So.
Okay, so we see the industry is moving there, but it's going slow because there is all this risk about what is best, and so the pace of this movement will be mandated or coordinated mainly by the rate at which this aging infrastructure needs to be replaced, and what would it take to speed it up? And I would ask this question to Pete if he wants to. What can we see from consumers? What would be the consumer pull from this component? Because besides this regulatory uncertainty, there is all this uncertainty about how proactive are going to be customers. Yeah. And
well, I kind of have the fun job, and we get to make all this stuff that is really boring fun. So by virtue of the fact that you guys are in the room today, you're horrible focus group members for what consumers think about the smart grid or about energy or any of these things. I'm an even worse focus group member as are these folks here. And so I think what we believe, well, first of all, we believe our job to be, once there is a consumer-based smart grid, AMI type investment by utility, our job most often is to make sure that consumers see benefit, that they really see benefit as that meter is installed and as it becomes operational. Because otherwise, there's a guy at Dominion that used to tell a funny story. He goes, all they see is a shiny new meter, right? I mean, so when a new meter goes in, absent any new rates or any sort of distributed generation, which is the fringes, all they see is a new meter. Their heads start spinning about more costs. Things can go awry, as they have in California and in other places. So we're kind of, for now, the next 5 years, as Alan said, we become this insurance policy of the consumer being engaged in this process before variable rates really hit, before distributed generation really hits. What we do believe and what we're seeing as a potential accelerator from the consumer side is that once consumers actually get some of this information, once they understand how their air conditioning affects their bill and how their base load is not a term you would use in consumer speak, but how their kind of core use affects their bill, they actually get fairly interested, not only in understanding, but in doing something about it. And we do believe that has the ability to sort of cascade. If it doesn't move the market, at least has the ability to sort of support the market. But we have the fortunate position of being involved in most of the high-profile AMI meter deployments in the country right now. It's kind of a risky and a fun place to be. And every place, I mean, every utility kind of looks us in the eye and goes, listen, you're in charge of making sure we can tell the utility commission that consumers get it, they understand it, and they think it's valuable. That's what we're being tasked with. And of course you drive efficiency, and efficiency is sort of the way you do that. But it's a pretty daunting and fun place to be.
Good, so now I'd like to transition to taking questions from students. Deepak.
Following up on the last point, how much of the outcomes can you take out of the customer's hands, and how automated can your systems become? And how are we progressing to that world where probably consumers just set up a base setting? They want to be energy conscious or environmentally conscious or cost savings mode. How is that progressing, and where are the opportunities there?
I bet you'll get 4 different opinions here, but I'll take the first part. I would say that just as there is heavy resistance to mandated time of use rates, there's going to be very heavy resistance, just the fabric of America, in being having your home automated. At its core fabric, it is Big Brother automating my home is not something that widespread America likes the concept of. So I think there'll be, and what we see is that there are lots of people like Peter and me and some of the others that like the home, the in-home displays, and like the idea of having a thermostat that you can control via the internet everywhere. Not very many other people really care about that. In fact, real-time energy use, it's been proven over and over, most people really don't respond to that for very long. What they respond to is a few snippets of information and the ability to make some changes that are long-standing, but to be able to absorb it the way they like to absorb it. You have to remember, we're widely moving to a situation where many Americans spend significantly more on their cell phone bill and their cable than they do their power bill. So the power, sort of, other than sort of really low income, the energy burden associated with income is lessening because the industry has done a fabulous job of keeping costs low for a long, long time. That's going to change over time, but for today, people really just aren't that interested in that stuff.
I think Pete has a good point to make, which is I think if it's Big Brother doing control, it's dead. We saw that backlash in California when they announced just that building standards were going to have a controllable, not control, but a controllable thermostat. But 2 points I would make. One is that in some markets, the service provider, not being the utility, is finding good traction. I mentioned this at the break, but I'll say it for everybody. There's a company in Germany called Keffler Energies that guarantees €200 savings for a 2-year contract. And they install automation and they control things, but they're not the local utility. It's a voluntary service. You can sign up for it. You can get the savings, guaranteed €200 in 2 years. That's a value proposition that a lot of consumers, I think, would respond to. They, by the way, don't need to be the utility to offer that. They can make more money selling that as maybe they can save more. They can monetize it in the wholesale market. In the case of competitive retail markets that are opening up in Europe, that's a great differentiator for retailers. So those services, the technology is not the impediment. It's really about the business models and getting the offer right and figuring out a way to monetize it. Second point is, I bet all of you, the cell phone comment's really apropos. If you go over on your minutes, you get a warning on your cell phone. It's event-driven management. As long as you're managing it the way you expect and your bill's going to be as you thought, there is no action necessary. It's event-driven or exception-driven information. I think that, instead of in-home displays, is the kind of thing consumers respond to. It's an app, your bill's going to be higher, do something about it, and some repetition of that, people change behavior. I know that information in the right context is where O-Power is trying to go, but technology can help make that a lot more user-friendly. Is that control? Is that Big Brother? Is that a privacy statement? I'm a little ambivalent about privacy because I bet all of you updated your Facebook page in the last week and told all of your friends worldwide what you're doing, and yet you're worried to know if someone knows you're drying your hair. Doesn't really connect with me, except the difference being you have a choice with your Facebook page. That's what you choose to make public, and it's quite a bit, versus something that maybe no one's interested in, but you're not choosing it. And I think that's the big difference here. You have to opt into these kinds of things. I don't think most people are going to hack into your meter to figure out what you're doing. They can hack into your credit card bill or your phone or anything else if they really want to know.
Yes.
So this question is for Alan. I saw that IBM is partnering with Juniper, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of networking companies in smart grid.
Well, the whole communications infrastructure for most utilities is getting a big upgrade with smart grid type applications. Some of it is people communication with mobile workers. Some of it's obviously the data collection from the meter, beyond the meter perhaps, and certainly upstream in the substation. So the work we're doing with Juniper with some clients is to help architect that new communications network so that we can collect more data, move it to the right places. In some cases, we're putting more distributed intelligence in the substation. And so we're using substation ruggedized type capability in the substation so we can bring data out of an existing array of sensors, some made by ABB, to bring that back and do more analytics on it locally. Same thing, by the way, we're doing with Cisco, rugged.com. There's a number of companies involved in the router business, and switch business, and then quite a number of companies that are involved in wireless and even some wireline communication technologies also that are suited for maybe high interference environments of substations or rural environments for AMI collection. There's really not yet a killer communications technology that's pervading smart grid anywhere.
This question's for Pete. So how is, I'm just curious more about Opower's business model and how they really get customers to engage in this if current electricity prices are so cheap. I know my electricity bill is not a huge burden for me. So what's my incentive if costs right now are really cheap? Do your customers just really care about the environment, or I mean, do they care about the utilities that are supplying this for them? How do they get excited about this?
Well, people care about themselves, right? So all of us are self-interested organisms, whether we admit that or not. But we're conditioned, it's born into us as a species that we're conditioned to respond to things straight ahead of us, but long-term things sort of wash away. And so there's a couple things that are sort of core to our business. And one, somebody brought up, I think Peter brought up during the session, is this idea of who's in the best position to dispense this advice or this information. And we very strongly believe the utilities are in the best position. In fact, our branding strategy is unbranded to consumers, completely unbranded to consumers, branded to utilities, branded to software developers. So when you look at us from an outward perspective, the people we want to know the name Opower are utilities, software developers. Those are our people we're trying to attract. Consumers, we strongly believe that the play for this information, whether it's us or someone else or the utility themselves, is them providing this information, whether it's smart grid enabled or not, back to the consumer. Every piece of research you'll look at shows that utilities are the most trusted monthly bill type of company out there, much more than cable, much more than your phone or your bank or anything like that. The second piece is, why do people care? Why do people respond? What we found is that if you present the same information in different contexts, it brings a different reaction. So if your bill is $100 a month, if I told you that, you might not care whether it's 90 or 100 or 110. But when I tell you that you're using 30% more than people like you in homes like yours, there's sort of this visceral reaction that could come from a number of things. It could be, wow, why am I using more than people down the street with the same house? That's crazy. Or I'm super type A competitive and there's no way that somebody's going to use less electricity than me. Or it could be, oh my gosh, I'm an environmentalist and that strikes me the wrong way. Or, and most interesting to us is, I'm super conservative and the root word of the word conservative is conserve, and I don't like to be wasteful. So what we actually find is the people sometimes you would think would be the least receptive to these kind of messages save the most by far. And I know the most receptive. It's not a green message, it's not a liberal versus conservative. It's here's how you're doing in the context of your peer group, and you start to make changes, you start to accept these other programs that utilities have. And it doesn't look like a lot for one customer, but when you look at it across hundreds of thousands or millions, it really does become this series of virtual power plants, even peak-based, which is pretty fun.
Emily?
So in reference to that about consumer trust, it does seem like initially consumers are accepting, okay, I can change what might happen, or how are utilities, perhaps to Rob, as well as to Pete, how are the next step of potentially doing the demand side management and making some decisions for them? Do you think that's where consumers are going to start to say, no, 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 like I'm okay with, managing it myself and comparing myself to my peer, but when you're telling me what I should do, how does that dynamic change, and how are you guys preparing for that?
Well, let me start and then toss it back. We have a voluntary demand response program in Florida. 1/3 of our customers are on it. So that gives us the ability to shut off the air conditioner, as Peter decided, their pool pumps and their water heaters. And it's a voluntary program that's been in place a long time, very well accepted. Whenever we see increase in weather like this summer or this winter in Florida where it's been hot and cold, we get a tremendous amount of people wanting to join that program. So we've been doing it for 30 years, so customers are accustomed to it. They have no problem with it at all. Works to the guys that like to push the button. They know when they push the button, those devices are going off. So that's well accepted. Kind of pick up what Pete said a minute ago, we're realizing, this is going to be hard to believe, that you are all different customers. For years, 100 years, we've had one residential customer, and our system is designed for that customer. Guess what? We don't. We have 3 million. We've broken them into, based on some research we're doing, at least 5 categories, because it goes back to your question, Kat. Many customers do things for different reasons, or do the same thing for a lot of different reasons. So we're getting smarter, and that's why I think the voluntary programs is the way to go, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. One of the things our research says is customers want choice, they want to participate, and that's why we have to give them options. And so we're using a lot of the work that Pete's company's doing to really find out what do customers really want. And a lot of them, they don't know what they want yet, right?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, in fact, customers do not know what they want. They'll tell you what they think they want, but then they'll do completely different things in all situations. But we believe in this concept of, if you say the utility is in the best position to deliver the message, it's not necessarily the fact that the utility has to be the person saying the message. So we've all used Amazon, right? And so, in fact, I exclusively Christmas shop on Amazon. I haven't stepped in them all in years. And to me, I don't do a lot of reviews on Amazon. Like, I don't rate a lot of products. It's an excuse that I don't have enough time. It's not a good excuse. But I draw tremendous value from the people that do write those reviews. And so a concept that we're going to be working on with a lot of utility clients is making the advice from your peers. The 3 most popular things people did in your area, the folks that were saving the most, were this, and this last year. All of a sudden, Progress, to use this example, is delivering the message, but some customer, like you, is just sharing with you what they've done. And the initial research would suggest that that is a very effective way to get even to that next layer of voluntary participant in these other programs, because these Florida utilities have done a fantastic job getting 1/3, a half of their customers in some segments to do this, which is really unbelievable. But we think we can even help get to a different group that hasn't yet opted in through some of these other sort of behavior science-driven techniques.
I kind of have a question for all of you. I'm curious about how this smart grid technology will benefit and affect the manufacturing facilities. Because 90% of the time we talked about the customer for the smart grid technology, we talk about the residential buildings and commercial buildings, and most of the software packages are only applied to residential buildings. So I'm curious about this, how you foresee this technology will affect facility.
A lot of the big users of energy have already, A, had time-based pricing, and B, found their own way of taking information about consumption, sometimes that they produce themselves off their own whole house meters, their building automation system, their factory automation systems, and incorporating that into their management structure. They took advantage of their own version of the smart grid 20 years ago, 10 years ago. This college, my guess absolutely is that it's served by a time-based price. It's got a very sophisticated energy management organization and a building automation system, and they have made both capital and operating decisions every day to respond to that. So I think that the open ground is the small commercial customer, the residential customer that has had none of that. But above a certain size, and 100,000 square feet is sort of the building automation world's view of where it's cost effective to start putting information systems in to manage things. They've been doing it. I've been to Bentonville, Arkansas, where Walmart has their worldwide energy management system, and it looks like NASA. It really does. They control everything centrally. And they have a very sophisticated operation there. They don't need smart grid. In fact, in some jurisdictions, they oppose the investment because they're getting asked to pay for things that, other than maybe some reliability improvements that they will or won't value. They don't get any downstream benefit.
I think we can take the last one, the last question.
I think all of you are different players within the same value chain, but I'm wondering, as you're sitting here, obviously you're being amicable, but at what point do you become competitors or allies? I imagine, you mentioned ABB is a vendor to IBM, but there's a limited amount of capital that can be invested in the smart grid, and I'm curious how your companies approach lobbying or fighting for the given slice of the pie that's most relevant. And I would assume O-Power is interested in metering, but if metering isn't necessarily a direction a given state or locality is going, do you kind of switch your game and play a little differently? I mean, what's the logic behind following the money?
Well, frankly, that's exactly what we do, and I would suppose most companies, small or large, do. We started as an efficiency company, and that's really still our core fabric. And I won't say we tripped on smart grid and found it, but I certainly don't think we expected it to be as core a part of our business as it has become. And the only reason it has become that is because the same concepts hold, right? I mean, whether you're a smart grid enabled consumer or not, you still have no idea of what your electricity use means. You have no context for, it's like the only thing in your life that the bill just shows up at the end of the month, and you don't know anything other than whether it was hot that month or not. You don't know if you live in a Prius house or a Humvee house. You just have no context for any of this. So most of our programs are not smart grid enabled. And what we find is that it's really dicey for us to try to get into lobbying or regulatory positioning around what states and what utilities should do with their smart grid strategy. What we end up being is just kind of whatever that strategy is, we kind of end up becoming a piece, and in some cases a rather small piece, because as Rob would say, the smart, we operate at this end way down here, and it's much, much bigger, and most of the investment is in sort of the operational side.
I think when you look across the value chain, and at least I can speak for my company, there's other third-party companies that we compete with, but we also need to partner. One of the challenges with smart grid is it involves so many different technologies, and I'll just pick one as an example: communications. Utilities have at least 5 or 6 different tiers of communications, everything from their enterprise application bus to how they communicate to their substations, how they communicate within the substations, how they communicate down the feeders, either for distribution automation or AMI data backhaul. Then you have local radio frequency mesh networks, which are part of AMI, and then Zigbee to get into the home. And so you look at all those different technologies, and a vendor like ABB, we're more focused on the apparatus and equipment. So we partner and we team up with vendors. We've teamed up with IBM, for example, in many cases, where IBM is providing the business process engineering, the IT infrastructure and management that complements our, what I'll call operational technology in terms of how you manage and operate the grid. So there's a lot of partnering, and there's a lot of equity investments that are going on in the industry. ABB just won the Clean Tech Award for having, I think, the most. We spent a lot of money on equity investments last year, so they gave us an award for it. But GE is doing the same thing, so we're not any different. So I think you're seeing a lot of cooperation. There certainly is some competition. Obviously, we compete against you directly in some areas, but we also partner at many other customers. I just want to make two other points. In terms of influencing regulatory policy, our company generally shies away from doing that, mainly because we don't want to be between Rob and his regulator. That said, we are lobbying through NEMA. We're a member of the GridWise Alliance, which Peter mentioned, both of those organizations. Plus, we're also very active in the Clean Tech Cluster here in the Raleigh area, which is trying to promote Wake County and more generally the state of North Carolina as the world-leading hub for smart grid technology. We have our headquarters here, so we're a little bit biased in that regard, but we think that this is a leading area with Elster, Census, Siemens, ABB, IBM, Itron has a facility here, Opower, Concert, let's see. Progress and Duke. I was going through the companies, but yes, the utilities, both of which now combined, but both of which independently got $200 million from DOE to make investments, smart grid investments, on their grids. So they're certainly a major player as a result of that, just with that $200 million. And of course, you had to match that money as well. So that means totally, that's what, $800 million between the two of you that's going into smart grid just between Duke and Progress as a result of the stimulus package. So we think that this is very much a hotbed for smart grid. So we're very much involved in that economic development and promoting that. But Alan, you were going to make something?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that in an early market as we are in smart grid, a rising tide does lift all boats. And even though Gary and I do compete in front of the customer on deals, we both, I think, have the same philosophy about educating policymakers, seeing more support for investments, investing in standards, making the pie bigger is far more important in a growing market, an early market, than us trying to jujitsu each other to get this clause in legislation that supports a smart transformer over a communications network. The regulators and the policymakers aren't there yet. The market is still growing big enough where it's just much better for them to be generally supportive of smart grid investing, have a very catch-all definition. And that's what we do. We team up in a lot of ways to subtly influence, to create more confidence by policymakers that they should support investments, that these are good things, that it's not a high-risk endeavor. And then when it comes to the RFP, we'll sometimes, on one RFP, we'll team up. We selected you on one RFP, and then we'll compete on others where the scope is.
Can I just take a shot to
Sure.
final? It's a great question, and what you're seeing is real, because we don't have the technology, we don't have the expertise in our company to do it other than with partners. And our job is to make sure we pick the right partners and the best partners. And that varies by whether we're talking about equipment or software integration engineering or the customer aspect, but we can't do this alone. And so we embrace all of the help. And we don't always agree, but we need each other's expertise and help to be successful.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
To disagree a little, the panelists were all right there, and I don't disagree with them, but you guys should know, in response to your question, they're kind of all part of the utility ecosystem, you would say. So they do all work together, and everything they said is true. There are a couple of hot spots where there is a lot of battling going on and a lot of money going in, but they're very specific spots, and I'll just mention two in case you guys want to do papers on them or something. One of them is who owns the information, the customer information. There is a lot of money going into it, and Google is putting a lot of money into it, so, and other folks. And it's a fascinating question. There's a proceeding in California with a huge record being built. All these complicated things. Another one is how much do you pay for demand response in deregulated markets? The FERC just put out a rule on that. It's extremely controversial. Brattle did a paper on it in Public Utilities Fortnightly, and there's a lot of, there's regulatory lobbying, with a stack of paper that tall. So those are two, there are places where the battles are being waged in front of regulators and in front of the legislatures, but they're specific, and this ecosystem is really working well together. Oh, standards is a third area where there's certain people battling over standards. But you guys are playing nicely together.
Thank you so much to everyone. There is so much to discuss that we didn't even touch, like data ownership and cost distribution, but it was great. Thank you so much. I think we should just...
I have one other question before we go that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. It's obviously an expanding market. It's an area that, there are are going to be new careers made in this space as well. So I would be interested in hearing from each of you, who are you hiring? Where are the areas that are growing the most, and what are the kind of skill or capability gaps that you see, that you anticipate, that you can sort of say, look, we see where the world's going and we just don't know where to find these kind of people. If you can talk a little bit about how you see the job market sort of generally, but specifically around smart grids evolving, I think this audience might have some stake in that question. So if I could hear from each of you and maybe just some comment on that.
Just real quickly, I mean, we are, for us at least, having sort of stratospheric growth. When I joined the company 3 years ago, there were 15 of us. There's about 200 now, probably be 350 within a year or so. And what we find, interestingly, is it's really hard to find, even though we have all these jobs open, it's actually really hard to find some jobs. And if I had a kid right now who was 18 years old, I would say, be a software engineer in the right context. Because actually what we find is, we see this kind of Facebook, Twitter, Groupon world not necessarily as being congruent with what we do. We see the skill set that's built in that environment as unbelievably valuable. I mean, the people that are creating those Netflix, Groupon, Facebook, Twitter applications, and the pace at which that is being done is phenomenal. So those are the people that are demanding whatever they want, and they're bringing their friends with them if they want to.
So these guys have missed the window because they're beyond 18, is what you're saying.
All missed that window.
Yeah.
Well, at Progress, Smart Grid is about the only place we're hiring. We've got cost control issues and cost management issues, but we have so much need to get our Smart Grid going. That's one of the places we're hiring. The programmers, software engineers, system architects, people that understand networks, people like market research and the consumer side of it, because again, we're not there yet. We got enough electrical engineers, but it's people that understand consumer behavior and consumer marketing. We're looking for folks in that arena. But it's a really great place to be in the utility these days, because it's the future of the distribution side of our business. Actually, the whole value chain, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. We're hiring. We're building a new cable manufacturing plant outside of Charlotte that will, I think, employ 100 people. We're putting a new distribution automation and distribution grid management center of excellence on the NC State campus, and we'll probably hire about 20 people for that. But from a broader point of view, I have a 19-year-old, by the way, and I tried to give him advice.
Didn't work.
It didn't work too well. It is the wrong source. What we see where there's a lot of job opportunity is individuals who understand how power systems operate and also understand the IT and communications side of running a utility and operating utility and controlling distributed assets. So it's that convergence of IT and OT. It's understanding the fundamentals of how a utility system works, the generation of power and how it flows, and then how you control that. The communications, I mentioned, the different types of communications, but it's that IT, OT convergence, understanding, basic power engineering and understanding communications. I think that's where, in this industry, the key opportunities are going to be in the short term. And the industry is hiring.
OT is?
Operational technology. So it's how you operate. The systems for operating the grid are now merging more tightly with the IT systems. And, so it's that systems integration, it's the business processes, it's the communications, and you still need to have an overall understanding of how you can move power, the fact that load always has to match supply. Energy storage is a great concept, it's starting to build, but that's still a major, major challenge. Basically, if supply doesn't match load at every single millisecond, you have problems. And that's a big challenge. So, but it's the operational piece, the IT piece, and that convergence.
Great.
So my perspective is we're hiring those skills for delivery. So we need IT architects, systems engineers, project managers, all of that. And the more you want to see the world, in fact, live in other parts of the world, the easier it is. But we're not hiring technology developers. Our strategy on technology is that we acquire technology almost all the time, and then when we buy companies, they become our seed corn for other development. The companies we're buying, we just announced one again yesterday, small to mid-size companies that are in this kind of smarter planet category. Energy is not the only part of that world. We see a lot of crossover between, say, water and transportation, and energy and other resources. So those companies that are showing good growth, that have a reliable revenue stream that fit into our strategy, we acquire those companies. And that's where a lot of growth in the market's happening, because that's where really the most innovation can occur. That size, well capitalized, getting traction, and we'll pick those companies up as we see their fit. We're not hiring those kinds of technology people.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.